Imagine a love so refined, a hunt so beautifully arranged, that even betrayal glows like polished gold. That is the world of Henry James's The Golden Bowl, a story where silence cuts deeper than confession, and a single flaw reveals everything. Published in 1904, this novel marks the summit of Henry James's artistic maturity, the third jewel in his major phase after The Wings of the Dove and The Ambassadors. James, an American expatriate who made Europe his lifelong home, was already celebrated for transforming the quiet drama of thought into the grand theater of human consciousness. Although The Golden Bowl didn't win literary awards at the time, the Pulitzer Prize didn't yet exist. It has since become a cornerstone of modernist fiction and a frequent subject of academic study, praised for its psychological depth and moral complexity. Henry James himself was more than a novelist. He was a bridge between worlds, old Europe and new America, realism and modernism, external event and inner perception. Critics often call him the master for a reason. Few writers have captured the invisible tremor of emotion with such subtle, relentless precision. In The Golden Bowl, James tells the story of two marriages intertwined by an unspoken secret. The characters move through glittering rooms, exchange polite words, and maintain perfect appearances until a single object, a crystal bowl with a hidden crack, becomes the mirror of their lives. There's a moment in the book when Maggie Verver, the daughter who must learn to see what love costs, looks at her world and thinks it was as if everything had been there to be seen, and she had only just begun to look. That single line holds the heart of the novel, the awakening of perception, the pain of knowledge, and the grace that follows. If you love stories that unfold like slow symphonies, where beauty hides danger and tenderness disguises strength, you're in the right place. This is Echoes of Books, and today we're diving deep into Henry James's masterpiece, The Golden Bowl. If you enjoy this kind of thoughtful storytelling, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting us through the donation link below. Your support helps us keep bringing the world's most fascinating books to life. If you step into the Golden Bowl, don't expect the world to shout at you. Expect it to whisper. The story begins in the still air of drawing rooms and private galleries, where everything gleams with taste, restraint, and money. Behind that calm, however, is a slow-burning drama of love, possession, and quiet betrayal. At the center is Maggie Verver, a young American woman of radiant innocence, who has grown up as the adored daughter of Adam Verver, a widower and one of the richest men in America. He's a collector, not just of art, but of beauty in every form. Together, they've lived in Europe for years, sharing a world so complete and companionable that it almost excludes everyone else. Father and daughter function like two halves of a single soul, gentle, intelligent, and entirely absorbed in each other's company. Into this perfect arrangement enters Prince Amerigo, an Italian nobleman with impeccable manners and impeccable ancestry, and, unfortunately, a nearly empty bank account. He's the embodiment of old-world charm, tall, dark, elegant, but with that faint weariness of someone who has lived too long in society's mirror. Amerigo genuinely loves Maggie, though part of him also loves what she represents: freshness, wealth, and the quiet moral power of her American idealism. Maggie, for her part, is dazzled. She sees him as a figure from the world of Renaissance portraits, something her father might have once bought but never possessed in human form. Before their marriage, however, there's a shadow that neither Maggie nor Adam knows about. Years earlier, Amerigo had been deeply in love with Charlotte Stant, Maggie's dearest friend. Charlotte is intelligent, worldly, and just poor enough to live between privilege and exclusion, always close to wealth, never owning it. Their love affair had ended not for lack of passion, but for lack of money. When Amerigo chose marriage to Maggie, and Charlotte quietly stepped aside, and no one ever spoke of it again. For a time, everything gleams with happiness. Maggie marries the prince, and Adam Verver, proud and a little lonely, eventually marries Charlotte. The symmetry seems perfect. 2 marriages, 2 generations, 2 friendships turned into family ties. But symmetry, in James's world, is never stable. It's the kind of perfection that trembles under its own weight. The turning point comes with the golden bowl itself. One afternoon, Charlotte and Amerigo wander into an antique shop. They find a magnificent crystal bowl, gilded with gold filigree. The shopkeeper offers it to them as a perfect wedding gift for Maggie. But when the prince inspects it, he notices something almost invisible, a tiny crack near the rim. He decides not to buy it. The symbolism is quiet but devastating. The flaw inside perfection, the hidden fracture in their shared past. Years later, Maggie, browsing in the same shop, unknowingly buys that very bowl for her father and Charlotte's anniversary. She brings it home as a gift of love, never realizing what story lies within it. When the shopkeeper later recognizes her as the prince's wife and mentions that he once sold that same bowl to the prince and another lady, the secret surfaces like a ghost returning to daylight. Maggie's world, once so harmonious, begins to shimmer with unease. From that moment, seeing becomes the novel's true action. Maggie doesn't storm, accuse, or demand. Instead, she begins to observe, quietly, painfully, with that new moral vision James admired so much. She sees how her husband and Charlotte move, how silence fills the spaces between words, how politeness can hide a lifetime of guilt. There's an extraordinary tension in watching her not act, a kind of emotional chess game where every glance counts as a move. When she finally understands the full truth, Maggie doesn't break the fragile structure of their lives. She repairs it, or perhaps redefines it. With gentle precision, she arranges for her father and Charlotte to move to America, where Adam can build his museum and Charlotte can start over in a new world. Maggie remains in Europe with Amerigo, but something fundamental has changed between them. The illusion of innocence is gone, replaced by a deeper, quieter connection. At the end of the novel, Maggie has become a different person, not the naive daughter of wealth, but a woman who has mastered the art of seeing and forgiving. She knows her world will never be flawless, but she accepts that love itself is made of cracks, and that beauty doesn't disappear when it breaks. It simply shines differently. The final pages feel almost like the closing of a symphony, every note resolved, every echo fading into gold. Adam and Charlotte sail away, and Maggie watches them from the shore. She turns to her husband, the man who once betrayed her, and sees not perfection, but something more enduring, understanding. The bowl remains cracked, but still intact, and in its fractured light, there is peace. The architecture of consciousness. Reading The Golden Bowl feels less like following a story and more like stepping into a beautifully designed mansion, each room gleaming, silent, and slightly mysterious. Every time you turn a corner, you find a mirror reflecting a mirror, until you're no longer sure who is watching whom. Henry James builds this psychological architecture with such care that the novel almost seems to breathe. The walls are made of thought. In the late period of his career, James famously dictated his novels rather than writing them by hand, pacing the room as he spoke to his secretary. You can hear that rhythm in the text, the flow of consciousness unfolding in slow, deliberate waves. He was no longer interested in external action, but in how people think, how meaning flickers in the space between a word and a glance. In The Golden Bowl, this becomes his greatest experiment to show that thought itself can carry dramatic weight. The novel moves through what critics call free indirect discourse, a way of writing that lets the reader slip in and out of a character's mind without quotation marks or warning. We are inside Maggie's perception one moment, then hovering just outside her like an invisible camera. This creates an eerie intimacy. We experience what she feels as she learns to feel it, and that makes her moral awakening all the more powerful. Henry James once described his goal as dramatizing consciousness, and this novel might be his purest attempt. The prince's small gestures, Charlotte's silences, Maggie's half-finished sentences, they become actions in themselves. The suspense doesn't come from what people do, but from what they notice. A change of tone, a shift in eye contact, a breath too long, that's where James locates the real drama. If you look closely, the entire book is structured like a mirror maze of perception. In the first half, we inhabit Amerigo's and Charlotte's world, their secret, their self-justifications, their elegance built over unease. In the second half, James flips the mirror. The same events replay from Maggie's point of view, but this time, we see the seeing. The tension isn't whether she'll discover the affair, it's how she'll handle the discovery once she does. There's something profoundly architectural about that symmetry. Each part of the story balances the other, like two wings of a house built on moral geometry. The beauty of this structure is that it mimics the way we come to know the truth in life, not all at once, but in gradual layers of recognition. We understand first the surface, then the shadow behind it, then finally the light that passes through both. The climax, if we can even call it that, isn't a confrontation, but a moment of interior clarity. Maggie realizes the truth, and instead of destroying the structure, she steps carefully through it, rearranging the walls so that everyone can still live inside without breaking. She doesn't expose the affair. She absorbs it, reshapes it. Her power lies in perception itself. In this sense, The Golden Bowl is less a love story than a meditation on consciousness as an ethical act. To see clearly, why James suggests, is the first step toward grace. Maggie's moral intelligence isn't cold, it's compassionate. She becomes what James called a central intelligence, the still point around which all other confusions revolve. There's a moment late in the book when James writes, she had learned in a single hour that seeing was a kind of suffering, and yet she had to go on seeing. That line captures the essence of the novel's design. Awareness is painful, but blindness is worse. The architecture of consciousness is both a prison and a sanctuary, and James lets us feel the beauty of both. You can almost imagine the novel as a house built entirely of glass. Every wall reflects another. Every reflection reveals a flaw. And yet, when sunlight passes through it, the imperfections turn luminous. That's what Henry James achieves here, a story where thought becomes light, where the moral and the aesthetic are the same. The Golden Bowl is symbol, beauty, and its flaw. If The Golden Bowl were only about an affair, it would be a good novel. But the moment that small object, the delicate, gleaming bowl, enters the story, the book transforms into something mythic. It becomes a meditation on beauty, illusion, and the quiet inevitability of imperfection. The bowl is not merely a prop, it's the soul of the novel, the object that carries its entire moral weight. When the prince first sees it, it's dazzling. A masterpiece of craftsmanship, crystal overlaid with gold, so luminous that it seems to emit its own light. But then he notices a flaw, a hairline crack near the rim, invisible unless you look closely. That tiny fracture changes everything. He doesn't buy it, and yet the image of that flaw lingers through the rest of the story, like a secret that refuses to disappear. Years later, when Maggie unknowingly buys that same bowl, she is, without realizing it, purchasing the truth. The crack, literal and metaphorical, has been waiting for her all along. It's as though the universe has arranged an elaborate mirror, reflecting her husband's hidden past and her own untested innocence. The bowl thus becomes a symbol of knowledge. To see the flaw is to lose the comfort of perfection. Henry James borrowed the title from a haunting passage in Ecclesiastes. or ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken. The verse evokes fragility, the moment when life, or illusion, finally shatters. In the biblical image, the breaking of the golden bowl represents death. In James's hands, it becomes something subtler, the death of ignorance, the end of innocence. What dies here is not love, but the illusion that love can remain uncracked. The beauty of the symbol lies in its paradox. The bowl's crack doesn't destroy it, it defines it. The flaw becomes the site of meaning. Maggie, upon learning the truth, doesn't smash the bowl or discard it. She keeps it in one quiet scene. She looks at it with calm eyes, understanding that the bowl, like her marriage, can still hold light, even if it's no longer perfect. That moment of stillness is pure Henry James, forgiveness refracted through glass. In this sense, the bowl is both a warning and a revelation. It tells us that perfection is sterile, that only when something breaks do we truly begin to see it. The golden bowl is civilization itself, gleaming on the outside, cracked at the core. It's the moral symbol of the age, the fusion of beauty and decay. James was, after all, writing at the dawn of the 20th century, when the grand certainties of the Victorian world were starting to fracture. Behind the etiquette and elegance of his characters lies the same tremor that would soon bring modernism to life, the realization that no structure, moral or artistic, can remain unbroken forever. If you think about it, the bowl's crack is also an act of mercy. It forces Maggie to grow, to stop living in a world of glass surfaces and start seeing what lies beneath them. There's an extraordinary line in the book when she reflects. The flaw was there, but it was as if the light passed through it, making it richer. That's the moral center of the novel. Imperfection not as failure, but as illumination. The golden bowl also functions as a mirror for the reader. When we encounter its flaw, we're asked to confront our own fascination with perfect stories, perfect relationships, perfect lives. James invites us to accept that the very things we cherish, love, loyalty, art, are beautiful precisely because they are fragile. It's also worth noticing that the bowl's beauty is artificial, gold fused with glass. It's a hybrid of value and illusion, of material wealth and emotional transparency. Much like the marriages in the novel, it represents an uneasy alliance between purity and possession. In that sense, the bowl is not just symbolic of love, but of the entire social world James depicts, a glittering culture built on appearance, where emotional truth is something you glimpse only through the cracks. The novel ends without the bowl ever breaking. James leaves it suspended in time, intact yet flawed, a living metaphor for endurance. Maggie's world doesn't crumble, it bends. That's the quiet miracle of the story. It refuses tragedy, yet it doesn't lie about suffering. It shows us how to live inside imperfection gracefully. When you finish reading, the bowl stays with you. It becomes the image you carry long after you've closed the book, a reminder that love, like glass, demands care, that knowledge can wound, but it can also make beauty deeper. Henry James, that patient observer of the human heart, leaves us with a kind of moral koan. What is more beautiful, the flawless surface, or the light shining through the crack? Maggie Verver and the Quiet Power of Women. If the golden bowl has a true center, it isn't the glittering object or the princely charm. It's Maggie Verver, soft-spoken, intuitive, and at first glance, almost ethereal. She seems gentle to the point of fragility, but by the end, she emerges as the quiet architect of everyone's fate. Henry James gives her one of the most subtle yet radical forms of power in all 19th century fiction, the power of moral intelligence. When we first meet Maggie, she seems like a daughter carved out of light, modest, affectionate, and entirely devoted to her father. Her love is deep but naive, She believes that truth and goodness are simply parts of the same structure, as perfect and transparent as her father's art collection. Marriage to the prince feels like a natural extension of that world, graceful, orderly, and blessed. She doesn't yet understand that love, in life as in art, is never without shadow. Her journey, however, isn't about rebellion or disillusionment. It's about perception. The moment she discovers the truth, the invisible crack running through her marriage and her father's new one, she doesn't react with the emotional explosion that most heroines of her era might have displayed. Instead, she begins to think. She studies people the way her father studies paintings, by observing the brushstrokes, the layers beneath the surface, the traces of what was once hidden. What she learns is that seeing clearly changes the balance of power. For much of the book, Maggie appears passive because she doesn't yet see. But once she does, the entire geometry of the novel shifts. The prince and Charlotte, who once held the secret, now become the ones observed. Maggie begins to control the moral atmosphere of the household. She says almost nothing, but her silence starts to organize reality around her. In this transformation, James gives us something astonishing, a portrait of female strength that doesn't rely on domination, rebellion, or speech. Maggie's power is interior, ethical, invisible, the power to shape the world through understanding rather than force. She chooses not to destroy the fragile structure of her life, but to inhabit it differently, to turn awareness into action without violence. Feminist critics often describe this as the economy of female agency in the late 19th century, the way women, constrained by social decorum, learn to maneuver through quiet intelligence. Maggie becomes a master of that art. She doesn't confront, she arranges. She doesn't condemn, she redeems. It's a moral choreography that looks effortless but requires extraordinary composure. There's a scene late in the book where Maggie walks through the drawing room after learning everything. She touches the furniture, the bowl, the window latch. Each object feels charged, alive with new meaning. James writes, "It was as if she moved through her own house as a soul through a body newly awakened." That's her rebirth, not as the daughter or the wife, but as the moral consciousness of the story. It's easy to miss how radical this was for 1904. At a time when women in literature were often punished for knowledge, think of Emma Bovary or Anna Karenina, Maggie's awareness doesn't destroy her. It elevates her. She enters the moral labyrinth and walks out intact, changed but unharmed. James refuses to make her a victim. He gives her the rarest gift his world can offer, the dignity of understanding. Yet there's an ambiguity that keeps her fascinating. Is Maggie merciful or manipulative? Does her kindness mask control? When she orchestrates her father's and Charlotte's departure to America, is she healing the wound or simply removing the evidence of it? The brilliance of James's writing is that he never answers. He lets grace and calculation coexist in her, like light and shadow mingling on glass. What makes Maggie unforgettable is her emotional intelligence, that slow, deliberate movement from innocence to vision. She teaches us that real maturity isn't about conquering others, but about seeing them as they are and still choosing tenderness. She embodies what Henry James once called the imagination of sympathy, the capacity to understand and forgive without illusions. In a modern sense, she feels like a spiritual ancestor of countless quiet heroines who came after, from Virginia Woolf's introspective women to the perceptive figures of Elena Ferrante's novels. Maggie's legacy is the idea that clarity itself can be an act of love. If the prince is charm and Charlotte is passion, Maggie is consciousness, the force that turns emotion into meaning. By the end of the novel, she has mastered the only kind of control that lasts, moral clarity without cruelty. And perhaps that's why her victory feels so luminous. It's not loud, it's light. Wealth, art, and the price of perfection. Every Henry James novel hides, somewhere inside its velvet folds, a question about money, how it moves, how it shapes beauty, how it distorts love. The Golden Bowl may look like a private drama of hearts, but behind every gesture and every conversation is a quiet hum of wealth. The Verver's fortune isn't just background decoration, it's the invisible current that keeps their world gilded and fragile at once. Adam Verver, Maggie's father, is the embodiment of that paradox. He's an American millionaire, a self-made man whose money has no lineage behind it, pure, modern wealth born of enterprise, not aristocracy. But instead of buying factories or land, he buys art. He collects paintings, furniture, objects of refinement, all in the hope of transforming money into meaning. To him, beauty is a kind of salvation, a way to redeem commerce through culture. He even dreams of building a museum in America, a temple of taste that will civilize the new world. And yet, beneath this noble ambition lies a faint unease. What happens when the act of collecting beauty becomes another form of possession? When the desire to preserve turns into the desire to control? That's the question Henry James threads through Adam's calm exterior. His love for Maggie, his acquisition of Charlotte, even his quiet acceptance of life's rearrangements, all of it reflects his collector's instinct. He doesn't destroy what's flawed, he rearranges it until it fits. The marriages at the heart of the novel echo this same logic of exchange. The prince brings an old title but no money. Maggie brings new money but no title. Their union is a trade, even if it's wrapped in romance. Likewise, Adam and Charlotte's marriage completes the symmetry, another transaction, balancing youth and wealth, vitality and safety. These arrangements are not cynical, they are simply the way the world works in James's Europe, where human connection and economic value are quietly entwined. James doesn't moralize about this. He simply shows how money infiltrates the very texture of emotion. The elegance of their lives, the gowns, the dinners, the antique objects, creates a moral atmosphere that is both exquisite and natfon and suffocating. Everything is polished, yet every surface reflects the same truth. Beauty comes at a price. It's tempting to see the Golden Bowl as a love story, but it's equally an allegory about capitalism and art. The bowl itself, that perfect fusion of glass and gold, is a commodity, something crafted to be admired, purchased, owned. It's the product of human labor turned into aesthetic illusion. When Maggie buys it, she's not just acquiring an object, she's participating in the same act that defines her father's life, turning emotion into property. The irony is that the bowl, like their marriages, carries a hidden flaw, the reminder that no act of possession can ever be complete. James was acutely aware of what it meant to be an American artist in Europe at the turn of the century. He saw his country exporting wealth and importing culture, trying to buy refinement from a world already crumbling under its own history. The Ververs are the perfect symbols of that anxiety. They don't just want beauty, they want to own the very idea of it. And in doing so, they risk turning love and art into something decorative, an exhibition rather than an experience. There's a haunting irony in the way Adam Verver plans to carry his art back to America. The objects he's collected, each one steeped in history, touched by centuries of meaning, will soon sit in a spotless museum under new light, stripped of their old contexts. It's a gesture of preservation that's also an act of erasure. James seems to ask, can beauty survive when it's uprooted and placed behind glass? Or does it become another kind of golden bowl? Perfect, priceless, and dead inside. The same question applies to emotion. Maggie's effort to preserve harmony in her world mirrors her father's collecting impulse. She wants to keep love intact, to keep everything beautiful, even if that means hiding the cracks. It's an instinct that feels noble, but it also reveals the danger of idealizing life too much. In both art and affection, perfection becomes a kind of prison. James writes, "They had lived in the midst of treasures, and the treasures had taught them nothing if not that beauty paid for its safety with its soul." That single sentence captures the tragedy and brilliance of the novel's world. The Ververs' fortune buys them serenity, but it also isolates them. Their wealth creates a silence so deep that truth can only echo faintly through it. Seen through a Marxist lens, The Golden Bowl is a study in how human relationships become commodities. But James, ever the moral psychologist, turns that critique inward. He isn't attacking capitalism so much as exploring how its logic seeps into our hearts, how even tenderness begins to resemble ownership, how beauty becomes a possession rather than a revelation. By the end, Adam Verver leaves for America with his collection, his wife, and his conscience neatly packed. Maggie remains behind, surrounded by the art he's left her. The golden glow of their world persists, but it's no longer innocent. They have learned that the price of perfection is always a little piece of the soul. Style as morality, the music of James's sentences. To read The Golden Bowl is to step into a kind of music, slow, circling and deliberate, and shimmering with nuance. Henry James doesn't simply tell a story, he composes it. Every sentence moves like a phrase of melody, unfolding thought by thought, pause by pause, until you begin to feel the rhythm of consciousness itself. His prose isn't just about what happens, it is what happens. James wrote the novel in the last phase of his career, dictating it aloud to his secretary, the young typist Theodora Bosanquet, who later described how his speech flowed in long, undulating waves, like music with a hidden pattern. That image explains everything about his late style. He was no longer writing to be read quickly. He was writing to be heard, as if the moral truth of each moment required its own tempo. The sentences breathe, hesitate, repeat, refine, like a person thinking carefully before speaking something that might change a life. Critics often call this style difficult, but its difficulty is moral, not ornamental. James believed that truth itself is subtle, and to represent it honestly, language must bend and twist to capture the faintest flicker of perception. His long sentences are not indulgent, they are ethical instruments. They teach us to slow down, to listen, to notice what lies between the lines. Reading him becomes an act of moral attention. Take this moment. For example, when Maggie finally realizes the extent of her husband's deception, James writes, "She saw at last, not what she had feared, but what she had been afraid to fear, and that was the difference that made her stand still." The repetition, the looping of thought, the careful balance of clauses, all of it mimics the motion of awakening. You can almost feel the light dawning in her mind, not suddenly, but as a slow widening of the soul. This is why James's prose feels alive. He doesn't describe emotions, he enacts them. The syntax mirrors the rhythm of moral experience, the way realization arrives not in flashes, but in waves. His characters don't merely speak, they orbit meaning, touching and withdrawing, as if afraid of breaking the delicate fabric of understanding. It's writing that requires patience, but it rewards it with a rare intimacy. You begin to think inside the characters' minds. There's also a kind of moral music in his restraint. James avoids drama not because he lacks passion, but because he distrusts it. For him, truth hides in tone, in inflection, in the subtle shifts of a single word. The grandeur of his world comes from understatement. His characters live in rooms filled with golden light and unspoken knowledge, and his sentences reflect that same balance, beauty hovering on the edge of silence. Even the way he uses metaphor feels symphonic. Mirrors, light, glass, reflection, they return like recurring motifs in a sonata. Each repetition slightly altered, deepened, transformed. It's as if the prose itself were a form of architecture, each paragraph an echo chamber designed to make moral thought resonate. Some readers find this style maddening, even claustrophobic. Virginia Woolf, who both admired and mocked him, once said that reading late Henry James was like being shut up in a small room with an elderly, well-bred gentleman who is determined to tell you a story in his own way. But for those who stay with him, the reward is profound. Beneath that polite precision is a fierce tenderness, a belief that clarity, however painful, is the highest form of art. The moral heart of the Golden Bowl lies in this very relationship between form and ethics. The sentences demand that you read with conscience, that you give as much attention to their nuance as the characters give to one another. James once wrote in a letter, "The house of fiction has not one window, but a million. Each clause, each comma, opens a different window onto reality." Through that lens, the novel's famous slowness becomes part of its meaning. To see truly, you must learn to look slowly. The reader who rushes through James misses not just his beauty, but his morality. In our age of instant opinions and fragmented attention, his style feels almost radical, a resistance to speed, a defense of complexity. Reading The Golden Bowl aloud, especially in Ember's soft, patient voice, you begin to realize that his prose is not archaic at all. It's meditative. It asks you to inhabit time differently, to breathe with the rhythm of thought. Each phrase folds gently into the next, as if language itself were learning to forgive. And that's why James's sentences still matter. They remind us that the way we say something is part of what we mean. His prose, like Maggie's grace, is a moral act, deliberate, compassionate, and alert to the faintest tremor of the human heart, reception, controversy, and why it still divides us. Few novels have traveled such a winding path from confusion to canonization as The Golden Bowl. When it first appeared in 1904, critics didn't quite know what to do with it. Some admired its polish, others called it unreadable. Even Henry James's devoted followers, who'd loved The Portrait of a Lady and The Turn of the Screw, found this new work dense, slow, and strangely hypnotic. One reviewer for the Times literary supplement confessed that reading it felt like walking through fog illuminated by gold. That description still fits perfectly. The book gleams, but it's difficult to see through. Early readers complained that nothing happens, that the sentences felt like webs of thought too delicate to touch. James, for his part, knew exactly what he was doing and knew how far ahead of his audience he had gone. He once wrote to his brother William, "I have done something that will make a small corner of art forever mine, even if no one ever opens it." For several decades, almost no one did open it. During the 1910s and 1920s, when modernism was in full bloom, James was viewed as a symbol of the old world, elegant but outdated. His intricate sentences seemed the opposite of the bold experimentation of Joyce or Woolf. But then a curious thing happened. Those same modernists began to recognize him as one of their ancestors. They saw in his layered consciousness the seed of stream of consciousness writing itself. By the 1940s, critics like Ephron Dioel, Mathieson, and Lionel Trilling had reclaimed him as one of America's greatest moral artists. The next wave of readers, the feminists, the Marxists, the psychoanalysts, found even more to argue about. To feminist critics like Nancy Armstrong and Rachel Duplessis, Maggie Verver became a symbol of female moral intelligence operating in a patriarchal world. She didn't overthrow her constraints, she transformed them from within. Yet others, such as Judith Wilt, pointed out that her triumph comes at a price. Her empathy becomes a social weapon, a way to maintain the status quo rather than challenge it. Marxist readings turn their attention to the Verver fortune, to the novel's obsession with art and collecting. In their view, the Golden Bowl itself was the perfect emblem of capitalist culture, a commodity so beautiful that it hides its own crack, the flaw of inequality that makes it possible. They saw James as an accidental chronicler of class anxiety, the artist who revealed how wealth turns even emotion into something to be curated and displayed. Then came the psychoanalytic and post-structural critics. For them, the Golden Bowl was a hall of mirrors, a study of desire and repression. The relationships between Maggie, her father, and the prince hinted at deeper psychological patterns: love that blurs into possession, identity that slips between roles. The critic Eve Kozovsky-Sedgwick read the novel through a queer lens, arguing that the real drama might lie not in the heterosexual triangles, but in the emotional intensity between Adam and Amerigo, two men bound by admiration and rivalry, their affection sublimated into the careful decorum of civilized life. And then, of course, there are the readers of today, the voices from Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok, and literary blogs. They're split right down the middle. Some post that it's like drinking sunlight, slow and intoxicating, while others joke that it's a book about rich people being polite for 500 pages. One Reddit user wrote, "It's so specific, so obscure, so complete, that it basically ended the classical style in American literature." Another, less enchanted, replied, "I finished it out of spite." Even the 2000 film adaptation by James Ivory reignited the debate. Critics praised its visual elegance, the gold tones, the glinting mirrors, the quiet performances of Uma Thurman and Kate Beckinsale, but argued that no camera could truly capture James's sentences. How do you film consciousness? How do you make silence dramatic without James's voice guiding you through it? The film became, in a way, a tribute to the impossibility of translating his art into another medium. What keeps the argument alive is that the Golden Bowl is both beautiful and exasperating, too slow for some, too rich for others, yet impossible to forget. It is, quite literally, a cracked masterpiece, one that reveals its light only to those willing to linger inside it. Each generation finds its own reflection in its golden surface. For readers living in an age of noise and speed, the book's slowness becomes almost spiritual, an act of resistance. For those drawn to moral complexity, it feels like a manual for perception. For others, it remains a labyrinth too finely built to escape. That's what makes it so enduring. It isn't a novel that asks for agreement. It asks for attention. It invites you to read the way Maggie learns to live, patiently, with compassion, with the courage to see, the light through the crack. When the last page of the Golden Bowl closes, the world it leaves behind is still glowing, quiet, unresolved, and golden. Nothing explodes, no one dies, yet everything has changed. The crack in the bowl remains, glimmering in the light, and we, the readers, are left staring into it, as if it were a mirror. Henry James once said that the final measure of a novel's worth is not what it tells you, but what it makes you feel afterward. And what this story leaves us with is a strange kind of calm, the feeling that truth, however painful, can coexist with beauty. Maggie's world is not the same after she learns the truth, but it isn't destroyed. In that sense, James gives us one of the most radical endings in literature, a victory of awareness, not of vengeance. The book teaches us that perfection is not the opposite of imperfection. It's what happens through imperfection. The Golden Bowl, still cracked, becomes more luminous because of the flaw, just as the people who survive the story become more human because of what they've seen. It's a vision of love that refuses both purity and cynicism. In an age obsessed with surfaces, then and now, the Golden Bowl whispers that to love well is to see well. Seeing is not judging, it's understanding. Maggie doesn't punish, she perceives. Adam Verver doesn't condemn, he lets go. The prince, once torn between desire and duty, learns the dignity of remorse. All of them emerge not pure, but clear. Perhaps that's why the novel still feels modern. It speaks to anyone who has ever had to live with contradiction, anyone who's realized that to forgive is not to forget, but to understand. It's about what happens when the illusion of perfection falls away and the world, somehow, becomes even more beautiful in its honesty. James ends without drama, without finality, without even a closing line of triumph. Instead, he leaves us with the soft, shimmering music of endurance, the idea that love and consciousness can survive together, that the crack in the glass is not the end, but the beginning of light. Today, over a century later, we live in an age where every flaw can be edited out, every imperfection filtered away. But Henry James's masterpiece reminds us that the real beauty lies in what remains unedited, the places where we are forced to look deeper, to feel fully, to stay even when the image breaks. And maybe that's the truest meaning of the Golden Bowl, that love, like art, requires patience, that grace is not given, but chosen, and that sometimes the most elegant form of power is the ability to stay kind when you finally see everything. So as the golden light fades and the piano settles into silence, let me ask you this. When you find a flaw in something beautiful, a relationship, a belief, even yourself, do you try to fix it, or do you learn to live with its light? If this reflection stayed with you, if you enjoyed this journey through the luminous world of Henry James, I invite you to keep walking with us. Like the video, subscribe to Echoes of Books, and share your thoughts below. What do you see in the crack of your own golden bowl?